Hi, it's Frank, continuing to talk about A harmonic minor. This time what we're doing is looking at the chords that are either major or augmented, a new term for us. So once again, just to recap a little bit, in the previous video we talked about the chords that can be found in this key that are diatonic to A harmonic minor. There are minor chords, and those were the root A as well as the note that's the fourth of this scale, D. And the two chords that can be diminished chords, or triads as we call them, in this key. And those were the notes B as in boy and G sharp. Recall that this scale, the A harmonic minor scale, is similar to the key of C major. In fact, that's the relative major. But because of the fact we're calling it harmonic, what we have to do to make that happen is raise one of the notes by a half step. So the G that exists in this scale is raised to G sharp. Every other note is natural, but the G sharp moving to A is what gives us some interesting chords options when we're making chords out of this particular scale. So just to jump right in, the first chord that we're going to play is E major, and this is the chord that exists exclusively in this natural minor, the harmonic minor scale, as opposed to the natural minor, and that's a result of the note I just referenced, the G sharp. So as we play through our minor scale, starting on A, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's where the E is. It's the fifth in this key. As I said in the very first video talking about the difference between natural minor and harmonic minor, if this were just a regular natural minor scale, the G would be a natural note. It would have the exact same notes, meaning no sharps or flat as C major. But because we raise it here, it gives us this particular chord, which is a major chord in the case of the E. So just to go through where we can find that, once again, like the previous video, we're limiting this just to the first three strings. The PDF I previously posted a few weeks back detailed how to find shapes for major, minor, diminished, and augmented chords all along strings 1, 2, and 3, as well as 2, 3, and 4. So hopefully, if you haven't reviewed that video, check that out. The links are still there. You can download a PDF which shows you exactly how to find these shapes that you can jump to and memorize. That way, it's easier when you're working through this stuff to sort of immediately visualize where these chord shapes are on the guitar. So for our purposes, we're going to start out by just looking at this chord, actually lowest on the neck, just so I can go from there up for convenience. Once I know that the three notes that make up this chord are E, the G sharp that's raised, and then B, which is the fifth of this particular chord, then I know that I can find them anywhere on the neck if I have a starting note. So my starting note is going to be G sharp. G sharp is the first fret of the third string, and it's the third, which means this chord that I'm about to play is going to be in first inversion. Recall how that worked, with the root going up an octave and then the third going up an octave as you move from root position, first inversion, second inversion. So the other two notes are pretty easy. They're just the open second string, open first string, those being the notes B and E respectively. So there is my E chord in first inversion. G sharp's on the bottom, to be clear. From there, if I want to go up to the second inversion of the chord, because a step and a half above G sharp is B, the fifth of this chord, I get what looks like a D shape. Not surprisingly, if I take a D and just move it up a whole step, I'm now playing E. That's with the fifth on the bottom, E in the middle, G sharp on top. And then from here to get to the root position of the chord, remember we started with first inversion, went to second inversion, now we're up to the root. I have E on the bottom, G sharp in the middle with B on top. So once again, we have first inversion, second inversion, and then our root position. These are all shapes we've seen before, especially if you've seen either of the two versions of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star I did involving chord shapes that were just inversions. So the next chord in this particular key that's major is F, and we're really in luck here. Why? Because as it turns out, if we play through our scale, it's the sixth degree of the scale, and it's right next to the fifth. F. So that F that's a half step means that all we have to do with all the chord shapes we just used is move them up one half step, which is very convenient when you're trying to memorize shapes. So in this case, then, what was first inversion here, accounting for the two open strings, means I'm now playing the first inversion of F if I take all those same notes and move them up this direction, of course, just one half step, one fret. A is on the bottom, C is in the middle, F, the root, is on top. So this is first inversion. Recall that here's where E was, so if I slide this up, here's an F in second inversion with C on the bottom, root in the middle, A on top. And then what was here, E, sliding up a half step, gives me F major. The root on the bottom, third, fifth on top. So once again, very close to what we just did for the E chord. We're just doing it for F. First inversion, second inversion, root position. Now the next chord in this key is actually built starting with a major third, but continuing with it afterwards. What I mean was, if you think back to when we got introduced to diminished chords, the idea was we used the same interval to build the entire 3-note chord. So it turns out when we use an augmented chord, we do the same thing, but with the interval of a major third. So in this particular key, C, the third note of the A minor scale, as a result of that G sharp, creates a special chord called an augmented chord. That's where we take the fifth and we raise that note by a half step. So if we were normally expecting a triad that would look like C, E, and G, for instance, in this case, because the G is raised, we have a G sharp. So that particular interval, and I'm going to start this one in root position just so we can be clear on the notes involved, and I'll explain why it doesn't matter. So here's the C, the root, here's the third, here's where G would normally be, but we're going to raise that to a G sharp. So here we have a very interesting sound. A G, in this case, C augmented, has the same interval between every note in the chord. The difference again is instead of a minor third, like with diminished chords, we have a major third. Now, as it turns out though, the same rule for diminished chords applies here, which means every note to move through the inversions has to be a major third apart. So from C, I have to get all the way up to E up here to play the next, or what we say, first inversion of this chord. E is on the bottom, then I've got the actual G sharp, and then I've got the C on top of that on the first string. Notice the shape didn't change at all. So this is exactly what we saw with the diminished chords. From here, I have to get all the way up to a G sharp way up here. Or if I wanted to drop down an octave, same thing. Either way, what I'm playing is the G sharp on the bottom, second inversion, root in the middle, and then the E on top, the third. So once again, we've got the same shape, whether we start down here in second inversion down way low, root, first inversion, and once again arriving at second inversion way up here. So again, it's a similar rule to the diminished chord. As long as we're moving the same interval as we go from one note to the next note in that particular chord, we're always playing the same shape, augmented. Augmented chords have, a very similar application to diminished chords in the sense that they can create a great deal of tension that needs to be resolved suddenly as you move either to another chord or you prolong that tension by moving through even a cycle of augmented chords. This happens in different ways, and we'll certainly get into that as we talk a little bit more about how we compose with these kind of chords. For now, though, the most important aspect is to memorize the shape and be able to move it around. Once again, right now I've only covered the first 3 strings. It would be useful to take all the stuff I've talked about in this video and the previous video, meaning minor, major, augmented, and diminished chords, and to be able to move and locate all those on strings 2, 3, and 4 as well, just like we did way back when with the major scale. All right, so that's it for now. Hopefully this has offered a little bit of clarity in terms of all the chord shapes we can find in a harmonic minor scale. Once again, if you're still looking to understand how we built these chords, the PDF linked in the description today will contain information on how to build all of these chords in a harmonic minor scale. Take care.